The political establishment has been left stunned as a quiet plot at the highest levels of government began to unravel in the most spectacular and unexpected fashion. In what sources close to number 10 have described as a political ambush, Nigel Farage, long dismissed as a spent force in British politics, has pulled off an extraordinary manoeuvre, one that could reshape the country's constitutional landscape and potentially bring down a sitting Prime Minister. Behind closed doors and away from public view, Farage secured a private audience with His Majesty King Charles III. The meeting, which took place just hours before Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer was due to finalise a confidential agreement with the European Union, has sent shockwaves through Westminster. The proposed deal, known only to a handful within Starmer's inner circle, would have quietly begun the process of reversing key elements of Brexit, effectively drawing the United Kingdom back into Brussels' orbit. According to insiders, the King was deeply troubled by what he learned during the meeting with Farage. The Prime Minister's covert agreement reportedly included provisions that would have restored legal oversight by the European Court of Justice, ECJ, reintroduced a youth mobility scheme permitting mass migration from EU member states, and even committed British taxpayers to funding aspects of European defence initiatives. While presented in public as a technocratic move to improve cross-border cooperation, the deal, behind the scenes, was described by senior aides as nothing short of a political minefield. The fallout was immediate and dramatic. Just as Starmer prepared to host European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for a summit in London, an urgent and confidential message from Buckingham Palace was delivered to Downing Street. The contents of that communication remain classified, but its effect was unmistakable. The summit was abruptly postponed with no future date set. Senior figures in Brussels were left baffled and alarmed, having anticipated a landmark agreement. Within Starmer's team, panic took hold. Furious and blindsided, the Prime Minister demanded to know how Farage had managed to reach the King first. That question has yet to be answered, but the implications are profound. What began as a calculated diplomatic pivot has now mutated into a full-blown political crisis. More than that, it has ignited a constitutional firestorm. Starmer, according to multiple sources, was preparing what would have been the most radical and controversial decision of his leadership to date, a stealth re-entry into the European sphere of influence, bypassing public scrutiny and circumventing Parliament. The objective was to restore what officials described as pragmatic alignment with Brussels, an arrangement that would bring the UK closer to its pre-Brexit position without the political baggage of an official rejoining campaign. Leaked internal documents now in circulation paint a damning picture. The proposed deal was far from modest. Key clauses would have transferred sweeping regulatory and legal authority back to EU institutions, empowered the ECJ to arbitrate on UK matters involving shared standards, and launched a youth visa initiative that critics argue could have led to uncontrolled immigration figures, particularly from Eastern Europe. Moreover, British funds would have supported joint defence ventures across the continent, a move widely regarded as controversial in both Westminster and the wider public. Publicly, the Prime Minister and his communications team were preparing to frame the agreement as a common-sense solution to shared challenges, such as labour shortages, defence cooperation, and trade friction. Privately, however, they knew it was political dynamite. The language of the agreement was deliberately vague, crafted to avoid tabloid headlines while appeasing EU negotiators and sidestepping internal Labour dissent. But Nigel Farage, reinvigorated after a surprise surge in local elections, had been watching closely. He recognised the shift in tone, the increasingly soft rhetoric towards Europe, the discreet meetings with EU officials, and the sudden emergence of phrases like alignment and shared values. To Farage, it was not simply a change of policy, it was a betrayal of the 2016 referendum and the democratic will it represented. Farage responded with stealth and determination. He began contacting whistleblowers within the civil service, reached out to sympathetic MPs, and reportedly acquired access to internal ministerial briefings and draft legal texts. In what is now being described as a masterstroke of political timing, he then secured a confidential meeting with the King, a move virtually unheard of for someone outside formal government. Exactly what was said in that room remains unknown. However, sources close to the palace indicate that His Majesty was gravely concerned by what he heard. Though constitutionally neutral, the King, still relatively new to the throne and reportedly determined to safeguard Britain's national integrity, is said to have taken the revelations extremely seriously. This was not a matter of routine governance, but of sovereignty and the legitimacy of the post-British English. The palace, while careful not to overstep constitutional boundaries, reportedly raised pointed questions about the democratic oversight of the proposed deal. Was Parliament being consulted? Would there be a vote? What protections existed for the British people's right to determine their own laws, borders, and courts? The King's subtle intervention, conveyed through formal channels but understood to carry weight, was enough to halt the process in its tracks. As news of the postponement spread, murmurs of dissent began to ripple through the Labour benches. Some MPs, particularly those representing staunchly pro-Brexit constituencies, expressed unease over the secrecy surrounding the EU summit. A handful have since demanded a full parliamentary debate on any future EU arrangement. Others, more cautiously, hinted that they would not support the government if it attempted to push such a deal through without public consent. What might have quietly passed under the radar has now become the subject of intense public and political scrutiny. Farage's intervention not only exposed the covert nature of Starmer's EU strategy, but also triggered one of the most significant constitutional standoffs in recent memory. At the center of it all lies the deeply symbolic and politically loaded involvement of the Crown. And so, with the Prime Minister's credibility shaken, his flagship European policy in disarray, and rumours of internal Labour dissent growing louder, the question looming over Westminster is not merely whether Starmer's EU agenda is dead, but whether his entire premiership is now on the brink of collapse. As the scale of the fallout became clear, cracks began to spread rapidly through Sir Keir Starmer's once tightly managed political coalition. The alliance, an uneasy mix of centrist technocrats, cautious soft remainers, and a smattering of disillusioned conservative defectors, was coming apart at the seams. Internally, the mood shifted from anxiety to alarm. One senior cabinet source offered a blunt assessment: the Prime Minister is barely holding it together. According to multiple witnesses, Starmer was seen storming through Downing Street, visibly agitated, berating aides and accusing his own staff of having handed the country to Farage. The composed, strategic image he had spent years cultivating had evaporated in a matter of hours, replaced by scenes of panic, fury, and political confusion. Meanwhile, in Brussels, fury erupted. The summit, once heralded as a potential diplomatic breakthrough, had disintegrated overnight. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was said to be blindsided and livid. Leaked internal memos revealed that officials in Paris and Berlin viewed the King's alleged intervention as nothing short of extraordinary, a possible breach of the United Kingdom's constitutional norms. Quietly, senior EU figures began re-evaluating Britain's credibility as a negotiating partner. Domestically, the reaction was even more combustible. Among pro-Brexit voters and campaigners, the leaked draft agreement served as confirmation of their worst fears, that the political establishment had been plotting to reverse Brexit by stealth. The inclusion of European Court of Justice oversight, the reintroduction of a youth mobility scheme, and the realignment of trade standards were seen as a total capitulation. Even mainstream political commentators, who had long dismissed such concerns as alarmist, began raising serious questions about the democratic legitimacy of Starmer's proposals. Inside Number 10, operations descended into near chaos. An emergency internal review was launched. Communications were sharply curtailed. Sensitive meetings were moved off the official record. Staffers had their phones confiscated. But it was too little, too late. Farage and his allies had already seized control of the public narrative. Across social media and major news outlets, the term Brexit betrayal trended nationally. Fuel was added to the fire when a scathing anonymous op-ed, purportedly informed by sources close to the palace, appeared in a major broadsheet, stating that the King was deeply troubled by what he perceived as an erosion of national sovereignty. Though the monarchy remained officially silent, the symbolic weight of that message was profound. Backbench Labour MPs, especially those representing constituencies in the North and the Midlands, felt the heat almost immediately. Anger in Leave voting areas surged. Constituents demanded answers. Local party meetings turned hostile. What began as whispered discontent morphed rapidly into open rebellion. One veteran Labour MP said it plainly during a live television interview. This party cannot and must not become a vehicle for rejoining the European Union by stealth. The foundations of Starmer's authority, once viewed as firm and unshakable, began to crumble. Letters poured into his office demanding full disclosure on the abandoned EU summit. Several Labour MPs called for an emergency party conference to scrutinise the leadership's direction and demand accountability. But the most ominous development came not from the opposition, but from within Labour's own ranks, whispers of a motion of no confidence. The atmosphere in Westminster turned febrile. Starmer's command over his MPs was slipping fast. Loyalty from within the parliamentary Labour Party began to fracture. Grassroots supporters, once fervent defenders of his leadership, now felt deceived. He promised to honour the referendum, said one lifelong Labour voter to the BBC. Now we find out he's cutting secret deals to drag us back into the EU. Who does he think he is? The national press, sensing blood in the water, turned predatory. The Times accused Starmer of orchestrating a covert rejoin strategy. The Daily Telegraph declared it the greatest Brexit betrayal since Theresa May. Even The Guardian, typically sympathetic to pro-European initiatives, questioned the wisdom and legitimacy of Starmer's secretive approach. Headlines screamed meltdown, betrayal, crisis. Leaked documents confirmed the suspicions. The draft plan indeed proposed aligning UK legal systems with the European Court of Justice, reopening migration pathways through youth mobility, and harmonising trade regulations with Brussels. The official government line, that this was merely technical cooperation, collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. Within Downing Street, conditions deteriorated further. Senior aides described the atmosphere as chaotic. Starmer, once known for his legal precision and calm demeanour, was now reportedly paranoid and erratic, lashing out at staff, and suspecting sabotage. The flow of leaks intensified. Anonymous briefings multiplied. MPs defected. Farage, notably, remained quiet, winning the information war without lifting a finger. Each new leak brought another blow, another ministerial resignation, another defection, another column crediting Farage with stopping Brexit 2.0. Then came the poll that changed everything. A Snap national survey revealed that public trust in Starmer's handling of EU affairs had plummeted by a staggering 19 percentage points. Among Brexit voters, a crushing 88% believed the Prime Minister had actively misled the public. Yet, Starmer doubled down. At a tense, hastily arranged press conference, he insisted the draft agreement was in the national interest. But the attempt at reassurance backfired. The term, pragmatic solutions, once a mantra of moderation, became the subject of online ridicule. Social media erupted with hashtags like #selloutstar and #CUBackdoor. Farage, re-emerging triumphantly at a rally in Clecton, declared to a jubilant crowd. They thought they could sneak us back into the European Union. But I stopped them. And I'm not done yet. The clip went viral. Farage had seized the moment. Across the channel, the reverberations continued. French and German officials, outraged by the collapse of the summit, began threatening to suspend elements of joint cooperation. Starmer, now seen not just as weak but as unreliable, had lost the confidence of both his European interlocutors and his domestic base. Talk of a snap election intensified. Key Labour donors withdrew their support. Shadow ministers began refusing media appearances. Names began to surface, Wes Streeting, Lisa Nandy, Rachel Reeves, as possible leadership contenders. And through it all, King Charles maintained his silence, never commenting publicly, but his shadow loomed large over the crisis. Starmer's premiership, once defined by control and legalistic discipline, now lies in ruins. His authority shattered. His government, perhaps beyond repair. The reckoning is no longer coming. It is already here.